For the Spring REST backend development, I'm using the Eclipse IDE for Java EE developers. So in the package explorer here, I'll just right click and create a new Spring Boot project by selecting the Spring Starter project option. And in order to have this option, you need to configure Spring Tool Suite plugin in your Eclipse IDE. For the project name, I'm just going to call it CRUD backend. Next. For the dependencies, I'll be using an embedded H2 database. I'll be using Spring Data JPA to map Java classes to the database. And in order to have the RESTful web service dependencies, we also need this web dependency here. Finish. So the project creation is done, and I will start by doing the data source configuration. And that we're going to be doing in this application.properties file. So Spring data source URL. I'm using an H2 embedded database, so the URL will be jdbc h2 user_db. This basically means that my H2 database will be created in this project folder, and the name will be user_db. We also need a username and a password. So Spring data source username, I'll set that to root, and Spring data source password, I'll also set this to root. I'll also just go ahead and do some few JPA configuration. So Spring JPA show SQL, I'll set that to true. This is so that we can see whatever queries we're doing against the database in the console. And Spring JPA Hibernate DTL auto, we'll set this to create drop for the time being. This means that anytime we run our application, the database will be completely dropped and recreated. And the H2 embedded database also comes with a web console. So if you would like to see your database from the console, then you also need to set the following configurations. Spring H2 console enable to true, and Spring H2 console path. I'll also set that to user_db. This means that if your application is running, say, on localhost 8080, then in order to access this web console, you type localhost 8080/user_db. And then you need to provide this username and password to access the console. Okay, with that done, I would just like to go ahead and create a resource representation class. So in this package here, I'll right click and create a new Java class. My Eclipse is hanging, so I would like to have that class in a completely separate package. And I'll call the class user. Finish. And in the class, we're going to have the following fields: private, long ID. This will be our primary key. Private, string, fname, which is an abbreviation for first name, and lastly, private, string, and as you can guess, name, which is an abbreviation for last name. Okay, next I'll generate the getters and the setters. So source, generate getters and setters. I'll select all of this and click OK. Then I'll generate two constructors. One constructor with these two fields, and the other constructor with no fields. I'll get rid of this super here. So with that done, I will also go ahead and quickly generate a toString method. We might use it for debugging. So in order to map this class to the database, we need to add the following annotations. Add entity annotation from javax.persistence. Then we need to specify that this ID is our primary key by adding the add_id annotation. And we also need this generated value annotation here. I'll save that and close it. With that done, I'll create a repository. So I'll also right click here and create an interface. I'll have that also in a different folder, and I'll call it user repository. Finish. This will extend jpa-repository, and it takes our object, which is the user, and the type of the primary key, which is of type long. We also need to import this package here. So this is basically where all the magic happens. We are going to be using this repository to do most of the queries against our database. So I'll close this, and now I'll create a REST controller. So again, I'll right click here and create a new class, and I'll have it in a separate folder as well. I'll just call it user controller. Finish. And in order to make this a Spring RESTful web service, all we need to do is to annotate it with REST controller, like this. So this REST controller is basically going to have methods that will be responding to various HTTP requests. The request in this case will be coming from our Angular client. So I'll start by annotating this with a request mapping here. And I'll call this API. Next, I'll inject the user repository that we just created here. So private user repository, and we'll do that with the @AutoWired annotation. Now that is done, I'll create the first method that will return all the users from our database when a GET request is sent. So public will return the users in a list user. I'll call this method GET users. We also need to import this package here. Make sure you import the right one. And this method will be returning all the users like this. Return user repository dot find all, and that will be in response to this request. So get mapping users. Okay, with that done, I'll create another method that will return just one user based on the user ID. So I'll copy this and paste it here, and I'll change this to user. It will take a path variable, which will be the ID of the user we want to return. The method will be get user, and I'll change this to return only a single user. The path variable will be of type long. We can also add here the path variable annotation, like this. And this will return just a single user, like so. Next, we'll do the method that delete. Oops, let me get rid of this. And then we do the method that delete a single user from our database. So I'll just call it delete user. This will be a delete request. So we annotate it with delete mapping. And this one here, I'll change it to delete, and I'll rather return a boolean. And here I'll just add the return true. So that is done. Next, I'll do the method that creates a user in our database. So I'll copy this here and paste, and I'll change this to create user. It will take in the user we want to create. User. And this will just be like this. And here we add save. And pass in the user we want to create. So the difference between the user we are passing in here and the user we are returning is that this new user will have the primary key field present, while this one will not have it. This will also be a post mapping. Next, I'll copy this and do the method that updates the user. And I'll call it update user. This will be a put mapping. And the rest will remain the same. The semantics is that when we are updating, we pass in the user that has a primary key field. So if the primary key field is present, this save will do an update. If it is not present, it will create an entire new user. So with that done, I would like to go ahead and create some users so that we can at least test some of this method and see how it looks like. So in our main application here, I will implement command line runner. And I'll add this unimplemented method here. So what this basically does is that when all the bin creation and everything is done and the application is started, this method will automatically run also. So in order to test that, we need inside here the repository. So I'll copy this and paste it here. I copied the wrong thing somehow. I need to copy this one. And paste it here. And I'll just create here some few users. So user repository dot save new user. So the first user, I'll call it 1. For example. Now just copy this and do it a few more times, like say 2 times. And 2 and 3. So then we run this application and see what happens. I'll right click here on the main file and run it as a Java application. And as you can see here, those 3 users were inserted in our database. We can also test some of these methods and see what it returns, like these users and this get user method. So I'll directly do that on the browser. I'll open up the browser here. I'm using Chrome. Here I'll type localhost 8080 API users. And as you can see, all the users in the backend have been written in a JSON format. I can zoom this out so that you see. These are the users we created. Say we wanted to see only this one user. We can just pass in here user and pass it to 1. And just that one was written. Now, if you want to go ahead and test the other methods that responds to the delete request, the put, and the post, you can use more advanced tools like Postman and all the others. So I won't be doing that. In the next tutorial, we are going to start building the Angular front end. So until then, see you.